92nd Street Y online media is made possible by a generous gift in memory of Christopher Lightfoot Walker, a longtime friend of 92Y's Unterberg Poetry Center and the Paris Review. This program, part of an ongoing collaboration between the Poetry Center and the Review, features a Writers at Work interview with Paul Theroux. It was recorded on December 18, 1989, before a live audience at New York's 92nd Street Y.
This is Paul Theroux here, in case any of you were confused. I should start by saying that this interview will appear in the Paris Review, which is a small literary quarterly, to which I hope you will all subscribe. If you do subscribe, you will increase the circulation of the Paris Review by marginal amounts. The magazine was founded, indeed, by Peter Matheson, who you'll be hearing later. I hope you'll come back to hear that, in 1953 in Paris. And one of the features of the magazine was an interview on the craft of writing, the first one with E.M. Forster, who was then at Cambridge University. This remarkable old man who hadn't written a novel since, or published a novel since 1924. And in this interview, which appeared in the first issue of the Paris Review, he talked about why. The magazine has continued for 35-odd years. The interviews have been collected in 8 volumes called Writers at Work, and most recently in a book called The Writer's Chapbook, which came out 2 weeks ago. Here it is. I feel forced to bring it out. I've been forced to by my fellow editors. It is the interviews reorganized by subject rather than by author. So if you buy this and you want to look up artificial stimulants, for an example, you will find that, which may be the first thing you will look up in the Writer's Chapbook, you will find, for an example, that W.H. Auden once took LSD, and he had a vague feeling that he was communicating with birds. That's the sort of extremely important information that is in the Writer's Chapbook. And if you want to find out about plot or character or how writers deal with sex, etc., it's all in this. Wonderful Christmas present for people who either want to write or have progeny who are thinking of writing, or just to have a good time. Wonderful book for browsing. The only reason I'm doing this interview is that it gave me a chance to come out and hold up, and therefore I also feel duty-bound to hold up a much larger book, which is Paul Theroux's My Secret History, which is coming out in...
Which has been out.
It is out, yeah, was out, and is coming out in paperback this spring.
Yes.
But if you hurry, you can buy this vast volume. It is also an important Christmas present. But buy it after the Writer's Chapbook. As Paul, the tall Paul, said, you're invited to ask questions, which means that you will be part of the interviewers. You will not be paid, but you will be part of this very important process, which is to find out something about the craft of writing. And that's what Paul and I will be chatting about, technical matters, mostly about this great mystery that goes into the craft of putting words down to paper. I don't need to tell you very much about Paul because presumably you all know what he's done. He's a prolific writer, almost 30 books, known not only as a travel writer, of course, but also as a novelist and a short story writer. So he has been involved in almost all aspects of writing. And it's very difficult to know where to start, but I thought we might start off with the travel. What is the original impulse in going off on these journeys that have produced such wonderful travel books? Is it curiosity? Is it escape, as perhaps it was with the 19th century women writers who went off and disappeared into the Saudi Arabia for years at a time? What was the impulse in your case?
Very similar to the 19th century women writers, actually, who were escaping to be themselves. I mean, a woman, Isabella Bird or Lady Hester Stanhope, went away to... Can you hear me, by the way? Went away to... in order to do something that they weren't allowed to do at home. I came from a very large family where I always felt lacking in a sense of privacy. I felt hemmed in by my family. I felt as if I had a certain slot in society. I came from not a small town, but basically not a very interesting place. And I felt that the world was elsewhere, and that nothing was ever going to happen to me, or that I wouldn't actually see anything, feel anything, any sense of romance or action, or that my imagination wouldn't catch fire until I left home. And so it was very important for me not to rebel, but simply to get away, to go away in order to discover whether there was anything within me, because I felt that with the eyes of other people on me, I was very self-conscious, and I was trying to live up to their expectations. And like the woman traveler, I could get away and not be a woman traveler, not be middle. I come from a family of 7 children. So
I was going to ask, how did the family feel about this? Because these women writers of the 19th century were, in the case, sort of spinster school teachers, weren't they? Which is hardly the fact in your case.
Well, yeah, it was of necessity. I mean, they had to be spinsters, although a lot of them left. They had husbands and then rejected the husbands, or either left behind, or they were widows, and then some went in disguise. I think in my case, what did the family think is your question. You're not missed a lot in a large family. And I think that, when people say that in a big family there's a lot of love, actually there isn't usually enough to go around. It's usually 7 contending, like fledglings in a nest, 7 very hungry people looking for something. So I think that it's much more normal for someone in a large family to leave than someone in a small family. Also, if you are from a large family or a nondescript town, you have a place to go back to. I mean, I think that the great travelers of the past came from solid societies. They weren't necessarily secure in those societies, but they had a place to go back to. Because of the 2 kinds of travelers, some are going looking for something, looking for a place to go and take root, and others are going because they feel secure and have a place to go back to.
What was the first of the journeys away from the family? I mean, was it at the age of 8 when you sort of put the knapsack on the...
No, there are a lot of... A journey, I think, is when you're completely cut off. I mean, I could say, well, it was when I went to visit my aunt when I was about 8 years old. I mean, that was a fact. I went away. I was on a train, and it's quite an interesting experience sitting down, sitting for 2 hours and ending up in Connecticut. That's a pretty astonishing thing. And reading, it seemed effortless kind of travel. But I think that a journey is something when you are completely self-sufficient. Recently I've been reading, I'm a judge in a travel book competition, the Thomas Cook travel book competition. And it's amazing how many travel books are full of acknowledgements, thanking TWA for the airfare and Coca-Cola for the... or for people for money, for thanking, as though it's just one huge binge of freeloading from one, end of the world to the other. I always thought of travel as something else. So it's got to be a more self-sufficient thing where you're cut off from your parents or from anybody who's going to be giving you help, and making your own way. Making your own way in the sense that you're making your own life. So I think a real journey implies a tremendous degree of self-sufficiency, where you're completely answerable for every decision that you make.
Well, now, was the first journey one that was also connected with writing? I mean, you had to pick a reason to go, other than...
I think I wanted to travel before I wanted to write, but I didn't understand travel until I began to write about it. And I think when you write about something, you give it a kind of coherence. I don't think everyone is like that. I'm only speaking of myself when I say that, but I don't begin to understand something until I put it into writing. And then I think I understand the nature of the experience that I've just had. And things that I don't write about, I don't really understand. I puzzle over them. I wake up in the middle of the night and puzzle about it. But things I've written about have a unity and coherence, a symmetry, and there's something satisfying about them, so that they settle in my mind. They stop worrying me.
What is that unity, the symmetry that you mentioned? Most
think
people
it's
seem to write to find out what they don't know about, but you write.
Well, you also, I think people certainly, you write to discover what's within you, what's activating your imagination. But I think it's to do with making sense of the world. I mean, just making sense of it, not being told what the world is. So because everyone and his brother, when you're growing up, is telling you not only where you've been or what's happening now, but they tell you what's going to happen. And it occurred to me, I guess when I was in my 20s, that they didn't know diddly. That actually people are telling you that Chairman Mao is going to live together forever, that no one knows that. I mean, in 1963, when I graduated from college, the Cultural Revolution hadn't happened, civil rights was just starting, Betty Friedan had just published The Feminine Mystique. All these people were alive. Ho Chi Minh was alive, the Vietnam War hadn't started, Kennedy was alive. And then a few months later, Kennedy was shot, Vietnam started, the civil rights started, women's lib started. Then a few years later, the Cultural Revolution. No one could see what was going to happen. But people are constantly told, adults appear to have the gift of prophecy, but they don't actually have it. So I think that that was kind of revelation to me, the fact that people older than me pretended to know what they were talking about and didn't know. They didn't know. And so after a while, I guess it was in my 20s, I thought, I can work this out for myself. They're wrong. Nothing should be more obvious to people, to anyone, say in his 20s now, who's probably analogous to the position that I was in the early 60s. You can see how a year ago people were thinking Erich Honecker is going to last forever and Czechoslovakia, isn't it awful, the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain. Suddenly, we're faced with a situation where in a matter of weeks everything changes in a seismic way. And I think that political scientists, historians, journalists, everyone has egg in his face. In China, in '86, I said to a man, what do you suppose is going to happen here? This is about the wisest man in China. He said, I haven't got the foggiest idea. We didn't know this was going to happen, which was liberalization and reform. We didn't know this was going to happen, so how on earth are we going to know what's going to happen next? We don't know. And in fact, it was a good thing he didn't make a prediction because people were talking about reform and then suddenly everything changed radically. So I suppose that's, when you say, when you're talking about unity, I think it's sort of a unity of vision or something resembling the truth, because there's something always prophetic about the truth. And when you see things as they are, rather than as other people wish them to be, and you often see them that way by writing about them, then you have a good idea or a general sense of where you are and perhaps what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And I found that very helpful because I found I think it was a feature of the 1950s and 60s, which was the 50s were a very dogmatic time, that people were constantly lying to me. And I thought, I sound a little paranoid when I'm saying that, but actually I thought, why are these people lying to me? Often when I hear a politician I think, why is this man lying to me, and does he know he's lying? He may not know that he's lying. So that helps the writing impulse, I think.
Well, I think it was Graham Greene that said there has to be to a shelf of novels a unity, a system, an overriding theme. So in your case it would be, well, curiosity in finding out that people don't really tell you the truth very often.
Yes, but I think that if there's unity in a shelf of books, you say I've written 30 books, and I have, but they're fat, thin, tall, short,
sure.
All different.
Huge.
Sometimes very insubstantial. But the point is that you don't actually know where you're going. It's not a pattern, I think, perhaps emerges. But the pattern may be clearer to a reader than it is to the writer. And I think it's often the case that one of the unfortunate things about writing is that a writer can't read his own or her own books. We can't be our own readers. And that's really a pity, because a book like this took 2 or 3 years to write, and I was plodding along very slowly doing it. I can't sit down and read that book. I can't, or any book that I've written, with the same sense that a reader, anybody here can pick it up, read it in a couple of days, and have a sense, an overwhelming sense of a mood of the book, or even an idea of, I don't like to use the expression, the art, or the figure in the carpet, let's say, but at least have a sense of the pattern of the book. And I think if you write the book, you're constantly looking at the flaws, the joins, the cracks, and so forth, and things that came in a rather hard way, or the slowness of it. But we don't, a writer can, I think, rarely see the symmetry or the pattern that he or she is making. And this unity of the shelf of books is something that I think eludes most writers. They say they know, but they're like Poe, who wrote that essay on how to write a poem, how he wrote a poem after he wrote the poem, although he says he wrote it before. But I mean, everything is glamorous in hindsight, and I think probably that's a helpful thing about writing too, but that things are wonderful in retrospect, but at the time, you're really groping in the dark, I think.
Well, do you have a good time?
Writing?
Reading the...
Only intermittently, and I sometimes come across a felicitous phrase or something funny, or... Yes, I mean, or sometimes it sets my teeth on edge. Not something I've finished recently, but earlier books of mine I find unappealing or puerile, and they don't... Oh, facetious. I noticed that there's a lot of writing that I did earlier, which is facetious, glib. And I think that's why I'm trying to write to prove that I'm really not that person who wrote those earlier books.
That's the unity we're trying to find.
It's an exercise in self-improvement.
I see. Well, to go back to the early stages of self-improvement, what was the first work, the first literary work? Was it a travel, or was it a short story, a novel?
You mean that I did in my life?
Yes. I mean, going back to this escape from your family, setting away from your family.
I think, to tell you the truth, it wasn't writing. I used to draw pictures, and I think actually that I first began to understand that, or let's say I talk about making sense of the world by drawing, and drawing was very important to me. And I think sort of sketching pictures. When was this? Maybe, let's say I was about 12 or 13. And when I discovered that you didn't actually have to see the world the way others portrayed it. So that's drawing someone's face, for example, is not only a way of describing that person, but it's a way of seeing. And writing, to a very large extent, is a way of, it's learning how to see, and how to speak, and how to hear. You listen to things that you don't, that the average, say, non-writer doesn't hear. Although sometimes when you hear a person telling a joke or telling a story or singing a song or doing an imitation, you think this person could be a writer because he hears things that other people don't hear, or she. And so I suppose I'm not answering your question because that the process of discovering how to see things or how to hear things comes so slowly. I think that when you're in your teens and in your 20s, your writing changes from day to day or week to week, so that your writing doesn't set in any sensible way until you're, I don't know, later. I think after you've written quite a few things. Until after you've begun to write, I think, from a position of strength and confidence, when you know that what you're saying is either imaginative or original or interesting.
And how do you find that out?
I think by doing it, by doing a lot of it. I mean, I think that one of the problems with people who write is that they don't write enough and they don't throw enough away. So, you know, the one book writer or the person who is constantly working on a poem or something. I mean, I think it should have. Everyone should be not forced, but should be encouraged to write as much as possible and to read as much as possible. I mean, a lot of writers don't read. And it's astonishing how the average person often reads more books than a writer. A writer says, I don't have time to read. But anyone who's growing up and wants to be a writer has to read, and then has to forget all that reading. I mean, stop reading. But you have to know what has happened in literary history and what people have done, and have a sense of the past, not your personal past, but the past in literature. Now you're saying, when did this happen to me? I think it probably, everything seems to have happened to me after I got out of school, after I left my family. I mean, if you're asking me, when did things begin to happen? I think it's when I went away, when I stopped studying, when I stopped going to school, when I stopped listening to people tell me what I should do. But fortunately, I joined the Peace Corps in '63, and although that was sort of Mickey Mouse thing, or it was a strange thing to do, it wasn't everything that it was cracked up to be. At least it got me to Central Africa, out of the gaze of people who were judging me, out of the gaze of people who were making me feel self-conscious. And then I think something happened when I went really far away and was plunged into a culture that was very simple, but very different from the one that I had grown up in.
This being in Malawi?
Yeah, it was called Nyasaland then.
Yeah. Well, did you start keeping a diary or a journal or notes?
I had always kept a diary, but I think a diary can mislead you. It can make you remember things that either are better forgotten or things that anything interesting happens to you, you're going to remember it. And it takes a lot of, this sort of a dullness, a torpor of the soul that comes over diary keepers. So diarists are sort of accountants of life. It's summing up things in a balance sheet. A day when nothing happened, they sort of invent things. But it's not, they give an order to that day, but I think that writing is more to do with giving an order to a much bigger stretch of time. Writing is more to do with losing your way, and then remembering through the process of writing, discovering, struggling, groping in the dark, and then discovering what your subject is. I think, yes, I kept a diary, but that didn't help me. It didn't help me.
But when you go on these extraordinary railroad journeys, don't you keep a diary or journal or notes? Or?
That's different. I think, yes. Then that's not a diary. I think of that as, that's the book. That's the book. Because although people tell you, among them the late Bruce Chatwin, whose theory was that there was no such thing as a travel book, but that travel was a form of fiction. A point of view, although he was a great friend of mine, I had a sort of philosophical difference of opinion with him about that. I really didn't agree with the idea that a writer who's traveling can make things up or reorder things or prettify things,
Did he?
Saying that, yeah. But I think that, yes, he did it all the time. In fact, he was pretty frank about it. Because, I said to him once, when I read In Patagonia, his first book, a book, I may say that he said that he read My Great Railway Bazaar and that it triggered off this impulse in him to go away. He was working at Sotheby's at the time. I mean, he wrote my copy of In Patagonia to Paul blah, 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 who unwittingly triggered this book off. I said to him, you say what Patagonia is like, but you never say how you got from one place to another. I mean, he's in one place, and then suddenly he's in another place, and then he's in another place. He never says where he slept, what he ate. He implies in some places that he walked 40 or 50 miles. If he did, 50 miles, people have written travel books. One man, anyway, travels around his room. Travels around my room book. Xavier de Maistre. Anyway, I said to Chatwin, you gotta, why don't you put these things down? And he said, well, you have to sort of embroider a bit. That's what gives it.
Was that embroidering or cutting out?
Cutting out, no, and falsifying, elaborating, and concealing. So I said,
this is terrible news. But it is in a sense, isn't it? I can see if he didn't describe going from A to B because it was just getting onto a train at A and getting off at B that you might leave it out of a travel book.
No, he invented characters. But he as I said, he saw the travel book as a form of fiction. But I said, he said, well, what do you think is wrong? I said, you don't come clean. And he said, I don't believe in coming clean. Do you? And I said, I thought that was what travel, I mean, that's what's the difference between the travel and the novel. Surely.
And you say he admitted this? Did he tell you, don't tell anybody this?
No, he said, that was his theory. He said, I don't believe in coming clean, do you? So in fact, his private life was or let's say, the actual trip that Chatwin took was, or might have been, quite different from the one that he wrote about. it's a testimony to his imagination that he could produce the books. I think his books are extraordinarily good, but you might not find your way through Patagonia by reading one of his books, or the Australian outback, or wherever. And by the same token, books that he said were fiction, like On the Black Hill was one, was pretty much I won't say a pedestrian account, but an account of a particular part of Wales. Do you understand what I'm saying? I think that you have to keep a diary when you travel in order to stick to the letter of it, and so that you know where you've been, and so that you're able, in a sense, even though you don't know what's going to happen. I wrote a piece in the New York Times about this subject, but parenthetically, I can say that, in a way, anyone who reads my book, Riding the Iron Rooster, would have a general sense that something was going to happen there that wasn't going to be what was predicted. I mean, there's a lot of discontent among the people that I talked to. And then people, when it was reviewed, in fact, in the New York Times, men say, oh, he doesn't seem to like the Chinese very much. You know, he doesn't seem to like them. And well, that wasn't it at all. I mean, if you can like 1 billion people, yes, I like 1 billion people. But as good as any other 1 billion people I know. I mean, there are probably 1 billion people in Africa too. But there's a sense that I had of a creeping sort of discontent. People said to me in China, I said, well, Deng Xiaoping seems to have his head screwed on, he seems to be all right. And they said, well, he still might make mistakes. He's not dead yet. We're not going to praise him yet. Even though Deng seemed to have the right idea in terms of reform. In Chatwin's view, in this other sort of, it's just this sort of, it's more a modern writer, a novelist, Mang Kei, failed person who doesn't have an idea of creating a character. I don't say Chatwin was like that, but this sense, I always want to write a novel. So people think, you want to write a novel, huh? Take a trip. Then you'll have characters, you'll have a landscape, you'll even have a little plot of your trip. But I don't think that's the way a novel, I think a novel comes from within you. It doesn't come from trekking through the Himalayas. I think that that's something else. And if you write a travel book and it's truthful, you keep this daily diary of things that have happened to you, ultimately you'll come up with a version, it'll be your trip, not anyone else's trip, but you may come up with something vaguely resembling what that country is actually like.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the Chatwin theory seems appalling to me, but how do you, on your trips, using your theory, have things happen to you that presumably Chatwin put in there to make the book more entertaining? Well, I mean, for example, it would be very possible to get onto a train and go across Siberia and have a miserable time and not have anything happen to you. You might get sick, or how do you, I mean, as a writer, and also as a novelist, what are the devices that you do as a travel writer to make the book interesting to the person you know is going to read it? How do you set up experiences?
It's a very good question. You seize the day is one thing. Seize the day. You wake up, you have to get up in the morning, and you can't.
Step number one.
Step number one is you can't take the day off. Not as silly as it sounds, because the temptation, particularly on this Trans-Siberian, because of a strange time difference, is to stay in bed. And to stay in bed and read. You can write about your reading, but I've done that. Passing through, happen to be reading an interesting book. I have done that, to write about what was happening to me when I was dreams. I dream a lot on trips to write about that. But that's rather an egocentric way of going about writing a travel book, and that can't be the sort of the beginning and end of it.
Yes, and you might doctor the dreams up too, which would be the Chatwin theory.
You could. I think that what you have to do is actively take advantage of a situation. And if there's a person who looks halfway interesting, or if there's a possibility of having a conversation with someone, I don't say necessarily, it could be the Trans-Siberian, or wherever, you have it. You have to, I think, go out of your way, buttonhole people. Every travel writer is a bit of has to be a bit of a Jehovah's Witness, you know? And knock on that door, ring that bell, and ask them.
Can you give some
if
instances?
They're saved.
Do you have an opening question? It must be very...
No. No, but I think that the first thing is that you can't... I have certain rules, which is don't carry a pencil. I mean, I wouldn't appear to write anything down if I were traveling anywhere. So I think one valuable help is learning to memorize what people say. I think it helps if you just you talk to them. Don't take notes. That encourages people. Any pens, pencils, notes frighten people, and particularly someone who's not particularly forthcoming. As soon as a person sees you taking notes, I think they begin to withhold. They begin to doctor what they say. Or vice versa. I mean, if they see you writing down, they sort of improve what they're saying. But if your question is, how do you do it? I think that you have to overcome your natural instinct to enjoy yourself and not turn it into a vacation. Because travel is something else. Travel isn't having a holiday. Travel isn't a horizontal sort of pleasure. It's not the pleasure that most people say they have in Martinique or Cancun. That's not traveling. That's having a nice time. But travel is the opposite of having a nice time. I think it's that you're going out, you're meeting people, you have to buttonhole people, talk to them, and in general, throw yourself into this experience and be as energetic as possible. That's why I think it's so hard to do. You spend half your time, half the day, talking to people, going out, say, what will I do today? And the rest of the time writing up notes. I mean, I actually think that it's very hard work. And that's why I would much rather go on a camping trip, alone. In fact, recently, I was in the Trobriand Islands, and I had a collapsible...
Where are they?
Trobriand Islands are northeast of New Guinea. Oh. And it's a small group of islands studied by Malinowski. You're aware of the book, The Sexual Life of Savages? Or Argonauts of the Western Pacific?
I plead ignorant.
Coral Gardens and Their Magic. Anyway, these books came out in the 1920s. Malinowski was a sort of Teutonic Pole who was interned there and then studied witchcraft, Aborigines, and Trobrianders. Now, the interesting thing about the Trobrianders is that people have no telephones, no electricity. There's only one little road. They have no contact with the outside world. So basically, all Malinowski's books still hold. Now, I met a lot of Trobrianders. I didn't...
No Chatwin he.
Oh, who? No. Different kettle of fish on Malinowski. Curiously, Malinowski hated them. And his diaries, which came out in the late 60s, are full of... He actually says... he actually quotes Mr. Kurtz and says he can understand in Kirowina the Trobrianders who are mocking him, teasing him, and generally driving him crazy. You could understand Kurtz saying, exterminate the brutes.
Yeah.
This is a diary he wrote in Polish and it wasn't published till the 60s, translated. It was quite a scandal in anthropological circles that such a renowned man who appeared to love these lovable little people despised them and they drove him crazy. Anyway, what I started to say was that...
Do they remember him?
No, but some of them... one of his books is called The Islands of Love, and they know the title of the book. I actually said to him, I asked several people about Malinowski. They said, oh yes, the Islands of Love. He wrote a book about us, The Islands of Love. Curiously, all the villages are there. They're built the same way. The same things happen. They have a yam festival, sort of free love bacchanalian festival where women take the sexual initiative.
Oh.
Usually in the form of a tug of war. Tug of war where the losers pounce on the winners. Whether it's men or women.
You mean there are 200 women tugging a war against two men?
20 on each side. And during the months of July and August, I'm sure this is familiar to some of you.
I think there's some people here who are leaving on the next boat.
It's the westernmost part of Polynesia. What I started to say was that I didn't take any note. Oh, well, I took certain...
It's very hard to forget what you've just been describing.
Absolutely. And anyway, I didn't keep a diary. I started by saying, oh yes, I was camping. I had a collapsible boat. a klepper kayak, a tent, sleeping bag, little gas stove. And I was just going island hopping. They're little coral atolls. They're not, they're hardly ours. They're flat as a pancake. And I was, it's not, major nautical problem. You just paddle across these channels from one to another when the weather sort of improves. And to me, that was paradise. The idea that, I wasn't writing. I had a shortwave radio that I listened to every now and then. The people are extremely friendly.
You're not going to write about
I'd like
this?
to eventually, but basically this was my idea of a vacation, which didn't involve writing, note-taking, or confronting people, going out and trying to discover what the people were doing. Also, they speak English, well, people of a certain age, people over 40 or 50, speaking, they're educated. There are very few schools there. I mean, they have they have none of the, let's say, disadvantages of civilization. Imagine a place where there's no electricity, no television, no telephone, no road, nothing, just nothing, no radio. They're still building boats, little canoes of the sort that they've been building for hundreds or thousands of years. Anyway,
I can't resist asking this, but did you try the tug-of-war business?
That's July and August.
Oh.
Would I try the tug-of-war? Is the question. Now, there's an interesting question, because I would say that, to which I'm going to address a serious reply. Let's say that I was writing about it. You would want to put yourself first. I wasn't writing about it, so I didn't care whether I was there for the Yam Festival or whatever. But if you're writing about a place, you want to see it at its most characteristic. When I went to Harbin and the northeast part of China, Heilongjiang, I went in the dead of winter when it was 35 below zero. When I went to Turfan in the western part of China, which is one of the hottest places in the world, I went in the summer when it was 120 degrees in the shade. So if you went to Trobrianders and you were writing about it, you'd have to go there when there was some action. Or else why go? I mean, because you would want to bring some kind of news back. So the serious answer is, I might not have get into a tug of war, but I would certainly want to be there when people said these things happen. Because you also want to say, do they happen? Maybe that's a lie. I don't know. That's what I was told. So you have to see places at their most characteristic, not go, like people say, go at a particular time of year, it's nice and quiet, you'll love it. You don't want to do that. I think you want to go when it's itself. And for example, coming to New York and not going on the subway, if you were writing about New York, and you know the subway, is a ridiculous thing, because the life of New York is subterranean. A lot of it is subterranean. So you'd have to see that. You'd have to go up and down. That's why I think that, I would probably.
And would you talk to people on the subway? I mean, is that how? I mean, what interests me is that
I actually wrote a piece about the subway, and
it's not very easy to do that. I mean,
no, but on the other hand, I was traveling with two plainclothesmen for part of the time, and I must say that, well, first, I think that New York subway is one of the miracles of the modern world, and say it's such a visionary thing, that the idea that in at the turn of the century, 1915, a lot of it was put into operation, is that it's got a dirty face, let's say, the subway, but it's the size of it, the network is amazing. Did I talk to people? I did talk to people on the subway when I was writing about it. Well, if you're not writing about it, I think you just keep your head down and you avoid eye contact. But one of the most interesting experiences of my writing life, I say this with all seriousness, was the 2 weeks that I spent in New York. It was 1981, when I did nothing except wake up in the morning and then ride. I rode everywhere in the subway. I've been to on every line and through or in every station. And
what was the miracle of it?
Size of the idea that without it, New York couldn't operate.
Well, but I mean,
and the other thing is
the writing of it.
People say that it's like a jungle, but the most interesting thing about it is it's like a jungle, because in the jungle, people say where you are at this moment is safe. All around, everything that you can see, this is safe. You're okay here, but don't go over there. And people say that about people in Borough Hall. Say, you're okay in Borough Hall. Stay away from the IRT. Stay away from the Bronx. line that's not their line. Everyone feels safe on his own line. But every other line is not safe, in the way that in the jungle, people say that path or that road or this village, stay away from it. So the people, the parts of the subway that people travel on constantly are safe and familiar, but one step further and you're in darkness. So that's pretty interesting.
What's the worst place you've been in?
The worst place I've been in, probably worst night I've ever spent was in Tibet. Oddly enough, it was just a hotel at about 16 or 17,000 feet, dirty, filthy, cold, miserable people, having a terrible time. It wasn't a hotel. I mean, it was like a madhouse, like a madhouse from 1759 or something. And I was thinking, I've never been colder. I've never been hungrier. I've never felt dirtier. And I've never felt such a sense of hopelessness that I was in a place that had been Tibet colonized. And then this was the best that they had to offer. Actually, it wasn't the best, but it was a place to stay. And so that was bad. But the worst place that you can be is in danger of your life. I mean, obviously, that any time when my life's been threatened is not something to recommend. And that's happened maybe half a dozen times.
But to go back once again to the Chatwin business, you never, for the sake of entertainment, or would embellish or change a person's dialogue, or at least to the best of your ability.
Edit, yeah, I would edit.
Yeah.
Which means, that's the great thing about not keeping a diary, is that if you keep a diary or you use a tape recorder, then you're setting things down verbatim, and nothing is more boring than verbatim. If this conversation of ours appeared unedited in the Paris Review, you would have a rash of resignations and people canceling their subscriptions. Do you agree with me?
Well, I always thought one of the fascinations of Andy Warhol's interview in the earliest days was that he did do that. And you had he would say side A would change to side B. Of course, the fascinating thing was that you were listening to Bianca Jagger in the Plaza Hotel, and although it wasn't very interesting, it was eavesdropping, which was what Warhol's great secret was. I don't think you learned very much, but there was something rather intoxicating. I mean, it's not a very good parallel to make. I couldn't agree with you more. The Paris Review,
I know what you mean.
Paris Review was not an interview, but
only a certain horror interest, in that you're basically eavesdropping on an empty mind, someone who's But I think that who wants to read that? I mean, you would want to read it up to a point, but then after a certain point, you'd say, edit this. It's like someone telling an
I agree with you.
story.
I used it. It
Edit
was
it.
extremely
Lighten
painful.
up,
Yeah.
drop that. Come to the point. You'd say, come to the point. But what I've always admired, if I can just throw a fish in your direction, is that I've always found that Paris Review things very literary. That what people say is very crisp. It's concise. It's memorable. Some of the best writing, I could say, has been the writers at work interviews. I mean, I can quote a lot of just bon mots.
And if you've gotten a bit.
Yeah. No, but I was going to say that delivering bon mots extemporaneously is not an easy thing to do. I mean, I remember Lawrence Durrell, for example, in his interview said, art is easy, life is difficult. Quite a nice thing to say. Hemingway says in that interview, his interview, every man needs a built-in shit detector. Every writer needs, so that you can tell, what's bad. And I mean, so forth and so on. Those things those don't trip off the tongue, do they? I haven't delivered any bombos in them sort of.
You wait, I'll make them up. You think Hemingway really said that? No.
Anyway, but not keeping a diary sort of not keeping a diary is an aid memoir, because you then leave out all the dross and you remember the pith, the really interesting or fascinating things that people say. And so your original question was, do I make things up? No, I don't. I'm not aware of it. But
Well, is the novel a relief in that case? Because there presumably you can do exactly what you want with your
yes,
characters.
I mean it's not. I find fiction immensely difficult to write, but certainly from the point of view of invention and the exercise of the imagination, you can create a character, set a scene, end something, improve things. Yes, it's an amazing thing. When your imagination is engaged, nothing is more liberating. Nothing on this earth can be more liberating, I think, than writing fiction. But I would also think sculpting, painting. I also think on an early Paris Review thing, someone described writing as one of the plastic arts. Someone says in an introduction, it was George Stein or somebody said, but the way that writers described their work, it was like one of the plastic arts, the way it's shaping things. That's a wonderful thing. Travel writing is not that kind. I think of travel writing as very much something that people ought to do with their left hand, you know? You shouldn't be too good at it. Usually it's like book reviewing. Book reviews shouldn't be too well written. As soon as they're well written, you begin to suspect the motive of the person who's writing it. And he or she, the reviewer, begins to loom a bit larger than the book, you know, being clever or too clever by half. And you think, well, what's this all about? This person's supposed to be reviewing a book. Is this a confidence trick or what? Why is this person writing so well? I'm very suspicious of book reviewers who write well.
You would have them write
plainly, pithily, come to the point, and
no flourishes.
Yeah, because I think that the reviewer who's writing, I'm talking when I say writing well, I mean self-indulgently, is calling attention to himself or herself, and that shouldn't happen with book reviewing.
But now with a novel, is there a shifting of gears for you then?
Yes.
I mean, from the left hand to the right hand?
Yes, it's not so much shifting of gears, but it's. I think that the novel comes out of long gestation period. You think. When I say you, I mean me, right? I think about a novel, a work of fiction. I think about it a lot, and it gathers, it takes on a life of its own, let's say, in my mind, and begins to live. And then I think when it catches fire, then I guess I write about it. But it's not going out and looking for something. It's not. I've often thought it was odd. I mean, I think it's odd the writers who actively go out and look for something to write about. Going to, I don't know. Graham Greene does it actually, but. In search of a character, let's say, that sort of general heading, in search of a character. Because I think that you can't search for characters, because if you're searching for characters, you're then lighting on someone and saying, I'm going to take that, I'm going to put that in my book. I think that it only really happens well when they come from within you, because then it's something that you actually know and believe in. And the search is a much more inward one, whereas travel writing isn't that at all. I mean, as I said, travel writing is a very extroverted thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, take my Secret History for an example. Can you describe the germination of that? What was the single? You didn't go out and look for a character, but what was it that was the impulse, what started this off?
I can tell you exactly. It was reading Turgenev, and Turgenev, oddly enough, is someone that, you know, I don't know, for some reason, in school, people say they read Dostoevsky, the Russians, Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, but Turgenev is sort of forgotten. Actually, I found what struck me about Turgenev was how he used his life imaginatively. If a love affair, a problem, travel, you could see how he had sort of worked it out, and how a book of his, a novel, emerged after coming through this sort of filter of his imagination, and might have sort of been maturing there for a long time. So I read it, I thought, well, this is something I haven't done quite that consciously. So I also wrote this book at a time in my life when I was trying to make sense of my life, and I felt as though I had lost my way. And I was trying to understand various phases of the world that I had passed through. And it occurred to me that I had seen a lot of things that had either been forgotten or been rewritten. And I thought, I'll base a novel on my life, but make it a novel. This is a novel. I mean, this is not an autobiography, but I wanted to make it look as much like an autobiography as possible so that it would be believed. In the way that The Mosquito Coast, I always wanted that book to be seen as a kind of, as a book written by someone who might have existed, you know, like Treasure Island does, or Prester John, or the way an adventure story often seems like someone who came back with this tale of adventure. I thought Mosquito Coast was like that. I wanted the book to be persuasive and to look truthful, but for it to be full of fiction, full of imaginative elements, and so that it would have order. And as I said, there's the unities that I mentioned earlier. So you're saying what? And so it was a very deliberate thing. But because I was using some elements of my life, I found it very satisfying to do. I originally wrote the first episode, and it was about 3 years before I did the whole thing. And the first episode was originally called Holy Orders, but I just did it one summer. And as a matter of fact, I wasn't going to do anything with it. There was someone encouraged me to publish it in an edition of 2 to give as a 50th birthday present. So I wasn't going to do anything with it. I was just going to hold on to it. So it was published in 2 copies. And I thought, I'll keep it back, keep it back, keep it back. And then the other episodes grew out of that.
Published in 2?
Yeah, it was 2 copies. I got one, and the birthday present person got the other. And I wasn't actually going to do anything with it. I was going to hold on to it and think of how it should go on. But I thought that a life doesn't, I mean, there's so many longeurs in a life, just years when nothing seems to happen, that I thought I'll leave those out and I'll make it my 6 crises, you know, or at least just something that has a shape. So that each installment would have a beginning, a middle, and an end, too. So that it would be like a complex piece. I also think, if I may say so, that if something doesn't have humor, I won't say it's worthless, but at least if something has real wit in it, I think it has value. And I'm very suspicious of unremittingly solemn work. But anything that someone writes, if there's no humor in it, I think that this book is, parts of it are very funny, if I may say so. And Mosquito Coast or other things, the travel books, that what I value in my work, if you haven't asked the question, but if you said, did I read it? Whenever I read something, if I find it has wit, has humor, then I still think years later that something is still funny, then I think, well, it can't be all bad.
How many pages were there in these 2 editions of the?
100. Each part of this is I write in longhand. So
I'm intrigued by these 2 copies that exist that are part of.
Well, and they're slightly different too from the printed version.
How many pages in?
100, about roughly.
So you had 100 pages printed, and you kept 1 copy and gave the other?
The person who was giving the birthday present, who's here this evening, actually, had it printed.
I see. I haven't got a watch, so I have no idea.
It's 7.
7. We're supposed to...
we could soldier on for another...
we could go on for hours here, but we did promise the audience that they could ask some questions. Yes.
Trobriand cricket playing. I didn't see Trobriand cricket playing to take them, but it is quite a big thing there. In fact, cricket in the Pacific is pretty big. No, I didn't see it. Favorite authors? Just far too many to actually, someone in a Paris Review interview has a list. I believe it's a Henry Miller interview where he says, "Who are your favorite authors?" And there's a long list of writers that he could never have thought of. You know, Dostoevsky, Shakespeare.
That's Hemingway. That's Hemingway.
No, is it?
And he adds painters and musicians and goes on and on.
Yeah, but he didn't. Well,
I added some. No, I should say about these interviews that very often, in that particular one, Hemingway hated to talk about writing, and that came in a letter to a question very much like the question that was just asked. And it was one of the very few questions that he oddly enjoyed answering. He was a very prickly man to interview indeed, and that answer came through a letter.
But he edited.
Yeah. Oh, yes. All these people also have a chance to see what they've said.
And they augment it.
And they very often do, since they're not inquisitions, supposedly. What was the... I know you met V.S. You met...
But you get the idea. I couldn't possibly... Too much to...
It's a long list.
Read recently. I've been reading travel books for a competition. I'm a judge, as I said, and so that's what I've been reading. I've read maybe 30 of them recently. Good, bad, and indifferent travel books for this. That's and for my to improve my mind. I was actually, oddly enough, reading Malinowski's diary. You know, I mean, that's the thing. It's called a diary in the strict sense of the word, and that's the most recent. I mean, I read that on the plane. I was in London. Read it from London to Boston, so it's fresh in my mind.
V.S. Naipaul was a tremendous influence, wasn't he? You met him, and what was the impact of his friendship with you or his advice? Because you've written about him, and you speak of his influence.
I think probably he was the first writer that I had read that I really respected, and who seemed interested in me, let's say, who took me seriously. It's very helpful, actually, because you wonder whether anything you're going to amount to. I remember I came here in about 61, I came here to the Poetry Center just to hear a writer called James Purdy speak. I'd read several of his books, The Nephew, Malcolm, and 63 Dream Palace. And I remember one of the high spots of my sort of early life was hearing James Purdy here. And seeing a writer is real, frail, fallible most of all, and insecure, all those things. Seeing that he's perhaps a bundle of anxieties is a very helpful thing for an aspiring writer to see. Not that this person is confident, bold, but that they're very sensitive. And I mean, all writers, I suppose, because writing is so difficult at the beginning that it's you very rarely find writers who are whole, complete individuals. In my experience, writers are among the most unpleasant, eccentric, paranoid, and difficult people I have ever met in my life. And that, but you start by thinking they look like whole people. They look like whole, complete, as if they have all the answers, because they seem to in their writing. But the writing comes out of a long process of throwing things away and rewriting things and improving things in the way that trips look very simple. A person writing about a trip, wonderful trip, simple trip, nothing about delays or how hard it was to get a ticket or being sick, because those things are too boring to write about. People are always full of admiration for the traveler, but in fact, travel is a disgusting and horrible and inconvenient thing. Almost as soon as you go away, you want to go home again. You know, it's glamorous in retrospect, but all writing is retrospective. So meeting Naipaul, I thought, this man has problems. You know, he loses his temper. He's a bit frenzied. He was not unsure of himself. He seems very sure of himself, but he actually seemed human. And so his humanness I found very appealing, and the fact that he took me seriously, I suppose he might have seen something human there too. But being taken seriously by him was a very helpful thing, and I actually liked his work. He was only I met him when he was 34 too. I mean, he seemed about 75 when I met him. You know, he seemed very old, and I was in my 20s. So it helps for a young writer to meet an older writer, someone who's been there, because the process of publishing is so mysterious. And it's being a mason. You want to become a mason, and no one really tells you that about the Masonic ritual of publishing. It's rather.
And that's what he talked to you about, rather than technical
things.
matters.
Yes, practical things.
Practical things.
Yeah.
Get an agent, that sort of thing.
Yeah, or why do you use semicolons?
Technical
yeah,
things.
that sort of thing, or serious rewriting and serious examining your motives. The whole sort of the total.
He was a tutor, in a sense.
Yes, yes, which is very helpful, because I didn't have a memorable education. It's what should happen to you if you go to a good school, or if you go to a good university. If you go to a really good place, someone takes you seriously, they take you aside and say, this is what you should be doing. No one did that to me. I felt, as I said, just as if I had missed out on that.
In My Secret History, Andre describes watching someone read one of his works and how satisfying it was. And I was interested in how you felt seeing one of your books come to the screen and watching it visualized and watching people watching something that you've written on the screen.
It's a strange experience, because something happens. It's like listening to someone read something you've written. Because they always read it with the emphasis in a different place from how you would read it. I mean, however badly a writer reads, still the most interesting experience you can have is to hear the writer reading something. He's not Laurence Olivier, but at least the pronunciation or the stress, the rhythm, the emphasis is where an actor or a great reader wouldn't put it. And so he's not reading for effect, he's actually reading it the way he wrote it. And that's what happens, I think, when you see your stuff on the screen. You suddenly see there's a different emphasis. It's slightly, it's recast so that it's not the same mood that you felt that you put down. I think it's a very surprising thing. And when people laugh, let's say you get a rise out of the audience with a movie, you think that, and particularly if it's something that you didn't write or a situation that you didn't create, it's a very odd experience. It's sort of, although the book has been somewhat falsified, but still, there's no way on earth that a movie can be like a book. It can be like it in spirit. So I would say that if someone makes a movie of your book, it's a thrilling experience, but it's a very odd one, somewhat alleviated by the money that you're being paid. But it's very strange.
Yes.
Yes. Was there any writing that inspired you to do the Mosquito Coast, such as you implied with this particular book you referred to on the table now?
Any writing?
Yes.
Previous writing? No. Mosquito Coast very much is a book that came out of the 70s. In the 70s, when the remember the Arab oil thing, when the price went up and they were limiting the amount of oil that they were producing, a lot of people in the States saw suddenly. It's happened recently with a 51% acquisition of Rockefeller Center by the Japanese. People think, who owns this country? I thought what's this all about? And in the 70s, it was the gas. People were saying, well, I thought this gas was ours. And people were saying, there's something wrong. And Americans, from American characters, from Huckleberry Finn upwards, Huckleberry Finn's father, you recall, threatens to leave the United States. This was once a great country. It's not like that anymore. The book came out of people surprised by the apparent usurpation of American culture by other people, the sense of alienation, and the idea that I want to have a character who threatened to leave, who said, one of these days I'm going to leave. I'm just going to get out of it. The way Huck's father says, I'm just going to get out of here. But if you start a book by saying you have a character saying, one of these days I'm going leave this country. I'm going to get out. This was a great country once, but I'm going to go somewhere else and start all over again. At chapter 1. Chapter 2, he goes. Chapter 3, what happens to him? Well, I thought someone carrying out a threat is a very, very interesting, a fascinating riddle to unravel. And so the book came out of that, this impulse to go, saying, rejecting a country, like Man Without a Country, and as I say, the sort of Treasure Island story, Castaway story. Also, I had children who were 11 and 13 at the time, and I made the characters 11 and 13. Because I also wanted, when I published that book, I wanted my kids to read it and identify with it, so that if their friends ever asked them, what does your father do? They could say, my father's a writer. They would say that anyway. But this would be a book that they would read. And they would somehow see themselves in the book. So I put elements of them in the two characters. I really wanted, of all the books I've written, I want that to be a book that they would read, so that they would know what I did for a living.
Did they read it?
Yeah, they did.
And enjoyed it?
Yeah, they did. Yes. I mean, up to a point. I mean, I don't know whether they were flattering me or not, but it was something that. I mean, I seem to be. It may seem romantic, sort of Charles Dickensy, to say that, book for my kids, but actually, it was very important for me to put in children their age and for them to read it. So it came out of that: 70s, deprivation, threats to leave, and then sort of personal, family matters.
Yes. To repeat this one.
Shall I repeat the question?
Yes.
The first question was, or first part of the question was about The Black House, a book set in England, and the second one was about it's called Picture Palace, about a photographer. You said the first one you described as Gothic fiction. Maybe. The book came out of going to England, leaving the tropics, going to England for the first time, and to me, England is one of the weirdest places in the world. It's much weirder than... I had been in Africa for 5 years, and I thought that I had seen strangeness, and just strange people. But the English countryside struck me as something stuck in the, 18th century, let's say. Very xenophobic, very odd, hard to figure out, very settled society, and very dark. And windswept. It was just this time of year. I went there in November and left in March or April of the following year. And I thought this was very odd, because I'd lived in Africa, and I thought having lived in Uganda, the world had no more surprises for me. And it had prepared me for everything. But that wasn't the case. I mean, even 3 years in Uganda had not prepared me for the English countryside. So the book, which it may look Gothic, but actually it's an account of someone who's trying to get to grips with this transposition. Not oddly enough about me. It's not a sort of full autobiographical book, but I have a great affection for the ghost story, and there's a sort of ghostly element in it. But I have written half a dozen, 6 or 8 maybe, ghost stories. And it's a form that I like, particularly making them persuasive. Ones that, because it's hard to write things that frighten you. In general, you can frighten anyone in a movie. I mean, the movies are a great form for thrills, for pleasing someone, frightening someone. Sex is probably better in a book, but fright, fear is very hard in a book. And you Stephen King fans might disagree with me, but I actually think that it comes very, very hard. So it was that.
Could I ask, why do you think sex is done better in books than it is in, say, film? I would think film had a big edge on it.
No, I actually disagree. I think that it's... Are you talking about hardcore porn or soft porn or what?
Well, any of those.
I disagree. I actually think that...
What would be some of the great sex things in literature that you would advise one to go and check this out?
First thrill I got, check out The Kiss. Isabel Archer kisses Caspar Goodwood in You know, not everybody's favorite sex novel, A Portrait of a Lady, but it's quite the kiss goes right to the tip of this guy's toes, you know, and it's something deeply physical. The trouble with movies is they're generally too explicit. And for the ultimate sexual sense is vastly enhanced by not being explicit, by the suggestion, and you supply the detail. You supply from your own obsessions, or your own fantasies, desires, or whatever. You supply the missing details. This is why Fanny Hill is not an explicit book. I mean, it's very sort of elusive, but it's a very sexy book. And I think...
You don't have to be graphic. I mean, I was noticing in My Secret History that you leave...
Movies are too graphic, I think.
I see, yeah. Because I noticed in My Secret History, you lead the reader right up to the... and then you move on.
Sometimes we move on, but I would say that sex is a very difficult area to write about.
I would have thought it was the most difficult to write about.
Is. Because the other thing difficult about writing about sex is that you give yourself away when you're writing about sex. I mean, the more explicit you are, they think, funny there, huh?
Something wrong with him or something.
I mean, E.M. Forster wouldn't publish that novel, Morris, feeling that he had given too much away. And it wasn't until it's a posthumous novel, as you know. And if you read D.H. Lawrence, you can immediately see that D.H. Lawrence is not a big macho, heavy hitter, or whatever the expression is, but he's a kind of strange, androgynous, crypto, latent, fascist, homosexual, but anyway, there's a lot going on there. There are a lot of the dynamic, the political and philosophical and sexual dynamics of D.H. Lawrence show through. They shine through like a beacon. You say it's very obvious with a D.H. Lawrence book that this guy, trying to be truthful to his experience, is very troubled and also is not sure. It's quite a nice Australian expression where they say, doesn't know whether he's Arthur or Martha. So it's a bit like that.
Well, perhaps we should end on that Australian... Well, thank you all for coming, and I hope you will...
Thanks for listening. 92nd Street Y, Unterberg Poetry Center webcasts, and access to our archive are made possible by a generous gift in memory of Christopher Lightfoot Walker, longtime friend of the Poetry Center and the Paris Review. For more information on 92nd Street Y and the Paris Review, please visit us on the web. This program is copyright 1989 by 92nd Street Y and the Paris Review.
Oh, I see what you mean. You meant that I would start all over again out of my mind. No, I didn't mean that. I meant that I have them beside me, but I start writing entirely all over again, if you understand me.
The second question I had was, do you find, like you said, you got into a camper and went all over Spain. Now, as a woman and an older woman, I find that very, very courageous. I don't know that I could ever do that. But do you feel that as a man in the first part of your life, that gave you a lot more of the kind of courage you would need to do that kind of thing alone?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I think it's true, yes. There's a hangover from the confidence that I had as a man at a time, of course, when the feminist revolution hadn't happened. So there was a much more of a gulf between a male traveller and a female traveller when I started doing it. And so, yes, I think it's true that I was conditioned to expect that things would go okay. On the other hand, I do believe that now things have very, very greatly changed, and I think myself that many women are unnecessarily timid about travel. I don't believe that it's so different for a woman than it is for a man nowadays. Of course, there are actual physical dangers of a different kind. But the general run of hazard is exactly the same for men and for women. And also, the treatment that a woman gets traveling is by and large better, you know. I think one has to admit it. People, for example, are not frightened of you. They tend to trust you more. And the relationship between women, between one woman and another, is a much closer one, by and large, than the relationship between men. So that wherever a woman travels in the world, she's got a few million friends, really, who are willing to help her.
Oh, you lucky girls. My. Questions? Yes.
If you're reading and preparing to visit a place you've not yet been to, has it ever been your experience to find that the place when you got there turned out to be largely what you expected, and on the contrary, exactly what you didn't expect?
Well, it's a long time since I've had to do this about a place I didn't know, if you see what I mean. Nowadays, I'm generally writing about places I know already. But I think some of the great travel books have not prepared me for the places that I was going to. And one of them is one of my favorite books, Doughty, you know. Mm-hmm. It's a marvelous book and a great work of art. But the image it presents of the desert and its life isn't the image I felt. I'm not grumbling at all. I don't mind. He wasn't trying to tell me what I was going to see in the desert. He was telling me what the desert was like to him. But that's one book that doesn't seem to me to match up to my conceptions, my own conceptions of the desert. Other ones I can't offhand think of, except of things, some Stern, for example. I can't honestly say that France seems very much like a sentimental journey to me. Mm-hmm. And some of the other people like Kinglake, who wrote deliberately in an entertaining mode, who were consciously, not a caricature, but they were consciously making a gay picture, an amusing picture of life. It isn't much like it when you get there.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Go back to the dissolution of empires.
Yeah.
Louder, please.
Through the dissolution of a major empire now, that of the Soviet Union, I wonder if you have any comments to make about it or any relationships you see between it and other empire collapses.
Well, I think that for me the tragedy of the decline of the Soviet Union is that it was an ideological empire. The British Empire really had no ideology, except one that had evolved by kind of rule of thumb in a very British way as it went along. The nearest thing it had to an ideology in the end, I think, was a general rule of fair play. That was the one moral motive that guided it. But the moral purpose behind the Soviet Empire seems to have been to be a different thing altogether. And I have always been very attracted by the idea of communism. And I think if I had been alive in those days, I probably would have been a communist. The tragedy of it was, it seems to me, that it was so soon perverted, the revolution was betrayed, it sank into the horrors of Stalinism, it slid slowly into the awful mires of inefficiency and disillusion and despair and unhappiness that we see now. And the failure of it seems to me to be that although it set out ideologically to provide welfare for a people, it seems utterly to have lacked the idea of giving its people happiness. And political ideology that doesn't take into account the human desire for happiness seems to me bound to fail. And perhaps this is why yours is so successful, because it does actually talk about the pursuit of happiness, doesn't it?
I think we'll end on that note.
Thanks for listening. 92nd Street Y, Unterberg Poetry Center webcasts, and access to our archive are made possible by a generous gift in memory of Christopher Lightfoot Walker, longtime friend of the Poetry Center and the Paris Review. For more information on 92nd Street Y and the Paris Review, please visit us on the web. This program is copyright 1989 by 92nd Street Y and the Paris Review.